The rains had not stopped for days. They came with the rhythm of something ancient, steady, heavy, and relentless. Across the savanna, dry earth turned to flowing mud, and the river that once curved gently through the grasslands had become a restless, roaring force. Its waters carried branches, reeds, and torn patches of soil, all swept together into a single, unstoppable current. By dawn, the storm had weakened, but its echo remained, in the swollen banks, in the trembling leaves, and in the uneasy silence that followed. The herds had moved to higher ground. Birds clung to the skeletons of drowned trees. Even the lions, masters of this land, kept their distance from the water's edge. It was then, in the hush between wind and thunder, that a sound rose, small, uneven, almost too faint to hear. It came not from the open plains, but from the river itself, a cry, a broken, fragile sound carried between the rolling waves. At first, it might have been mistaken for the whimper of a pup or the call of a wounded bird. But then it came again, sharper, desperate. Somewhere within the churning water, a lion cub was fighting against the pull of the flood. The cub couldn't have been more than a few months old, its fur still light, its body small enough to fit between the reeds. No one could tell how it had ended up there. Perhaps the den had flooded, or the pride had been forced to move during the night. The storm had no mercy for the small or the slow. Now, the cub's paws struck weakly against the current, its head barely staying above water as foam and branches swirled around it. The savanna, usually alive with sound, seemed to hold its breath. The river hissed and swallowed everything else, the soft hum of insects, the rustle of distant grass, the low murmurs of a pride watching helplessly from afar. The mother lion stood on the opposite bank, pacing, her tail flicking sharply in agitation. Her roars broke across the wind, deep, urgent, filled with fear. But the cub was too far, caught in a part of the river where the current bent and deepened. Not far from there, on the edge of a small settlement, a man stood watching the flood. He was a herdsman, one who had lived beside this river all his life. To him, the water had always been both a gift and a warning. He knew its rhythm, its moods. But today, it looked like something wild and unfamiliar. He had come to check on his cattle, but the cry drew his eyes to the rushing channel below. At first he saw only the debris, a log, a tangle of grass. Then a small shape emerged between the ripples, moving, gasping, turning helplessly in circles. He leaned forward, heart tight, uncertain if what he saw was real. But when the cry came again, thin, strained, fighting against the water, he understood. It wasn't just any animal. It was a cub, a lion's child. The man hesitated, rain dripping from his hair, mud pulling at his boots. To step closer was to risk everything. Yet something in that sound, something raw, wordless, pleading, held him still. He whispered, almost without realizing, "Stay with me, little one." The river raged on, its voice swallowing his words. But the moment had already changed. All across the plains, the flood carried the scent of life and loss. The cub's cry rose once more, carried beyond the water, over the drowned grass and into the open sky, a sound too small to fight the storm, yet too strong to vanish entirely. By the time the clouds began to break, the man had already started walking toward the river's edge. The storm had left behind silence, but beneath that silence, something fragile was still calling, a life not yet ready to be taken. The cub's body was light, almost weightless against the strength of the river. Every few seconds, its head disappeared beneath the surface, swallowed by brown water and churning foam. Then, with trembling effort, it would rise again, eyes wide, nostrils flaring, gasping for air it could not hold for long. The river had no rhythm anymore. It moved in every direction at once, carrying with it branches, roots, and the scent of torn earth. Somewhere upstream, a tree had fallen, splitting the current. One branch had caught the cub's leg, dragging it in a slow circle. The animal kicked weakly, its small claws scraping against soaked bark. Each movement seemed to cost more than the one before. Its coat, once pale gold, was now streaked with mud and riverweed. Water filled the tiny hollow of its ears. Yet still the cub tried. The instinct to breathe, to live, older than thought itself. On the far bank, the mother lion remained restless, pacing near the edge. Her roars had turned hoarse, replaced by shorter, broken sounds that rose and fell with the wind. She could see her cub, but every step she took toward the water sent the current surging higher, snapping at her paws. Behind her, two other lionesses stood in silence, muscles tight, their eyes fixed on the same small point in the river. In the wild, lions do not weep or beg, but their bodies speak what their voices cannot. The stillness of shared loss, the ache of watching something too small face something too large. The herdsman moved closer through the reeds, careful with each step. The rain had softened the earth, making the ground uncertain beneath him. He could see now that the cub's movements were slowing, its body turning with the current like a leaf caught in a whirlpool. The river hissed against his boots, cold and rising. He looked across to where the pride stood, their golden coats blurred by distance and mist. Between him and them lay the wild, unpredictable, unforgiving, sacred. The cub's cries were faint now, replaced by small, rasping breaths. Its paw broke the surface one last time before sinking again. A thin strand of grass tangled around its tail, twisting it in place. The herdsman waded forward, heart pounding beneath the steady roar of the river. He had seen floods take animals before, gazelles, calves, even birds swept from the trees, but never this. Never something so small, so helpless, fighting against something so vast. The water reached his waist. He steadied himself with one hand on a buried branch, his other hand outstretched toward the moving shape. For a moment it seemed the cub had vanished entirely. Only ripples remained, circling where it had been. Then just beneath the surface, a pale flicker, a paw, limp and trembling. The man moved again, closer, the current pushing hard against his knees. The mother lion saw him then. She stopped pacing, her gaze fixed on the figure in the water. Her ears pressed back, her body lowering in a tense crouch. But the river was too wide, too loud for her to reach him or drive him away. Between them, the cub turned once more, lifted by a hidden surge that carried it within reach. The man lunged forward, one arm plunging deep and his hand brushed soft fur. He caught it by instinct, gripping gently beneath its chest, raising the small body above the waterline. The cub's limbs hung loose, its chest barely moving. Mud dripped from its coat, thin streaks of brown sliding down its legs. The man pressed it against his chest, whispering, "You're all right, little one. Stay with me." The words vanished into the rain, but the cub's body twitched, a faint, uncertain movement, as if life were testing whether to remain. Behind them, the mother lion gave a low, trembling call that rolled over the water and broke against the hills. The sound lingered long after the river's roar had begun to fade. Rain still whispered over the plains, soft but unending, turning the grass into rivers of its own. The man stood knee-deep in water, his clothes clinging to him like a second skin. He had no plan, no map of thought, only the faint shape of the cub carried by the current, slipping further from sight each passing second. The river was wide here, the color of earth, swollen with silt and fallen leaves. Its surface looked alive, restless, shifting, consuming everything that touched it. He had crossed this place 100 times before when the season was kind. In those days, the water ran clear, no deeper than his ankles, with fish darting between stones. But this flood was different. It had swallowed the familiar. Trees bent under its pull, their roots straining, and whole patches of land had disappeared beneath its rise. The man could feel the power of it even now tugging at his legs, urging him back. Yet the faint cry that had drawn him here still echoed somewhere ahead. The cub's body turned in the current again, its paws beating weakly, muzzle dipping below the surface. It was no longer fighting, just reacting, drifting wherever the water chose to take it. The man took a slow step forward, steadying himself on a submerged branch. His breath came shallow, half from cold, half from fear. Every movement had to be deliberate. One wrong step and the river would claim them both. His world had narrowed to this: the flow of the water, the trembling in his limbs, and the small flash of gold fur between waves. The storm clouds pressed low overhead, their edges pale against the horizon. Somewhere behind him, the wind carried the distant call of the lioness. It wasn't a roar now, but a low, broken moan that rolled through the air like grief-made sound. He glanced once toward it, meeting her shape across the water, a dark figure, motionless, her eyes fixed on the cub. Between them stretched the raw line of the flood, untouchable yet shared. The man moved again, chest deep now, the current striking harder. He could feel the strength of it against his ribs, dragging at his shoulders. Bits of bark and grass brushed against him, carried by the same force that had taken the cub. He reached for the next step, but the ground fell away, and for a heartbeat he was weightless, swept sideways, almost losing his balance. His hand shot out and caught the trunk of a drowned shrub. The bark tore into his palm, but he held on. He looked up. The cub was closer now, circling in a small whirlpool where the current bent against the reeds. It no longer cried. Its body was limp, rolling slowly, one paw raised as though in surrender. The man took a deep breath and let go of the branch. The water lifted him, spun him forward. He kicked hard, pushing against the pull, his arms cutting through the mud-thick current. The river bit at his sides, but he kept his eyes fixed on the small, silent shape ahead. When his fingers finally brushed fur, it felt colder than the water itself. He gripped the cub beneath its chest, pulling it close. For a moment, it hung there, lifeless in his hands. Then a tremor, faint, almost imagined, passed through its body. The man cradled it against him, pressing its face above the surface, water streaming from its nose and mouth. He turned toward the bank, the distance suddenly vast, his breath heavy with the effort. "It's all right. I've got you," he whispered. The words barely carried beyond his own breath, but they steadied him. Step by step, he moved backward through the flood. The lioness's calls faded into the rhythm of the rain, replaced by the sound of his own heart and the soft weight of life returning against his chest. When he finally reached the shallows, he stopped for a moment, standing still beneath the rain. The river continued on, wild, endless, as if unaware of what it had spared. The man reached the bank slowly, the water dragging at his legs with every step. His arms trembled from the strain of holding the small body above the surface. When he finally stood on solid ground, he sank to his knees, the current still pulling at the hem of his clothes. The cub lay motionless in his hands, a bundle of soaked fur and fragile bones, barely breathing, its chest lifting in uneven, shallow gasps. Mud clung to its whiskers. Its eyes were closed, lashes trembling faintly with each exhale. He laid the cub gently on the grass, brushing away the reeds tangled around its body. The storm had left the earth slick and cold, and the air carried the scent of wet soil and river silt. For a long moment, nothing moved. The man's own breath came in harsh bursts, mixing with the faint, broken rhythm of the cub's. Around them, the plains seemed to hold their breath. No bird calls, no wind through the reeds, just the soft pulse of rain fading into mist. The man placed his hand against the cub's side, feeling the fragile rise and fall beneath his palm. Its heart beat faintly, quick but fading. He rubbed gently along its back, trying to coax warmth into the sodden fur. The cub's paw twitched, a weak response, and then went still again. It was caught somewhere between fear and surrender, its small body trembling but unable to move away. The man could feel the fragility of it, the line between life and loss drawn in the stillness of the moment. Across the river, the lioness remained, her body half hidden by the reeds. She had stopped pacing now, watching the man with a steady, unblinking stare. The water still ran between them, wide and heavy, but the sound of her low, guttural rumble carried across it, not a threat, not a warning, but something else. He lifted his head for a moment, meeting her gaze. There was no way to explain what he was doing, yet something passed between them, wordless and uncertain. An unspoken truce, perhaps only for now. The man turned his attention back to the cub, cupping his hands over its small chest. Its breathing was faint, each exhale followed by a pause too long for comfort. He brushed the mud from its muzzle, then ran his fingers along its ribs, trying to free the trapped air and water. A thin trickle escaped its mouth. The cub coughed. Once, a weak, rasping sound, then gasped again, pulling in air as if for the first time. The man exhaled, his shoulders lowering. "You're all right?" he whispered, though he wasn't sure if it was true. His voice came out rough, almost part of the wind. The cub's eyes fluttered open, cloudy and unfocused. For a second, they met his, wide, unknowing, reflecting the dim gray of the sky. It did not move away. It didn't have the strength. Instead, it gave a faint, broken sound. A soft moan that seemed more instinct than effort. The man lifted it gently again, pressing its small body against his chest, letting his warmth seep into it. Its fur was coarse beneath his hands, but slowly he felt a slight change. The shivering eased, the shallow breaths finding a rhythm again. The rain had thinned to a mist now, falling so lightly it barely touched the ground. The man stayed, there motionless, while the cub's breathing steadied against his heartbeat. Across the river, the lioness took a step closer to the edge, her gaze fixed on them. She did not roar this time. She simply watched, her tail still, her ears low, her body balanced between fear and faith. In that quiet, fragile space, between the river and the open plain, the wild and the human world touched for just a moment. No dominance, no ownership, only a shared need for the same fragile thing, survival. And for that small instant, both seemed to understand. By the time the sun broke through, the rain had softened into a silver mist. The river, though still swollen, had begun to fall back into its banks, leaving a trembling quiet in its wake. The man stood at the edge of the clearing, the cub still pressed against his chest. Its fur, once heavy with mud and water, was drying now under the faint warmth of morning light. The air smelled of wet grass and clay, the kind of scent that only follows after something has been both lost and found. The cub stirred weakly, its small paws shifting against his shirt. Its eyes blinked open again, clearer now, though still tired. There was no struggle, no cry, only the slow rhythm of breath returning, fragile but certain. The man crouched, beside a low patch of grass where the ground rose gently above the flooded plain. He laid the cub down, his hands lingering for a moment, as if unsure whether to let go. The animal remained still, chest rising and falling, its tail giving one soft twitch before it turned its head toward the scent that drifted on the wind. Across the river, the pride had gathered again. The lioness stood at the front, her body wet, her fur darkened almost to bronze. The river that had divided them was calmer now, not gentle, but no longer violent. The man could see the mother's ears tilt forward, her head lifting slightly as the faint cry of her cub reached her. He stayed where he was, silent, the distance between them marked not by fear, but by understanding. For a moment, neither moved. Then the cub gave a low, broken sound, more a breath than a call, and the lioness stepped forward. She waded, in slowly, each step careful, testing the strength of the current. The river caught at her legs, pulling, but she pushed through until the water fell away around her chest. When she reached the shallows, she paused, her eyes fixed on the man. He took a small step back, lowering his gaze, his movements measured and quiet. The cub shifted again, lifting its head, recognizing the nearness of something familiar. The lioness moved closer, her pace deliberate, her tail low, the muscles in her shoulders rolling with every step. When she reached the edge of the bank, she stopped just a few paces from the cub. The two looked at each other, mother and child, both marked by the same river, both changed by it. The cub gave a weak mewl and tried to stand. Its legs wobbled, unsteady from exhaustion, but it managed a few steps before collapsing back into the grass. The lioness bent her head, pressing her muzzle gently against its neck. Her breath stirred the wet fur as she began to lick away the traces of the flood. Slow, deliberate strokes, each one reclaiming what had almost been lost. The cub's body relaxed under her touch, its small tail flicking weakly, a sign of comfort. The man watched in silence, his clothes still dripping, his skin chilled by the wind. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, as if his body were sinking with the calm that now settled over the plain. The lioness lifted her head once, meeting his eyes across the short distance. There was no growl, no aggression, only a quiet pause that carried its own kind of language. Then she turned away, nudging the cub gently until it began to follow, stumbling at first, then steadier with each step. They disappeared slowly into the grasslands, the cub pressing close against her side, her tail brushing over its back in rhythm with her stride. The man remained where he was, still and grounded, the last of the rain dripping from his sleeves. The river behind him murmured softly, its fury now replaced by something gentler, almost grateful. As the sun climbed higher, its light touched the surface of the retreating flood, turning the water gold. The man exhaled, long and quiet, and turned toward home. Behind him, the plains stretched wide and clean again, the grass shifting in the breeze like breath returning to the land. And in the distance, the lioness's shape moved with her cub, two golden forms against the fading silver of the storm.